We're pleased to invite you to yet another EMET briefing. These briefings, these monthly seminars on Capitol Hill are being brought to us by the Dr. Miriam and Sheldon G. Adelson Family Foundation, and we are extremely grateful to them for their support. Imagine, if you will, if rockets were coming into Washington, D.C. every 10 minutes. Basically, that is what the people of Israel have been going through over the last several days. Now that it's in week 2. They have been besieged with over 1,500 rockets by now. I know in some places it takes no longer than 15 seconds from Gaza, where they're being shot from, into southern Israel. Sometimes they have up to a minute to get to where they're going, into their safe rooms or into their shelters. No people should be asked to endure this, and certainly no people would ever endure this without responding. According to Article 41 of the United Nations Charter, the first responsibility of every nation state is to protect its civilian operation. And now the rockets are not only being aimed at southern Israel or Sderot, they're also being aimed at Haifa, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Beersheba, almost 100%. They've actually aimed these rockets at Ben Gurion Airport in order to shut off all air transit and further isolate the Jewish state. So, as you all know, yesterday morning, Egypt had tried to broker a ceasefire between Hamas and the State of Israel. The State of Israel, of course, was willing to go along with the ceasefire, but it didn't take more than an hour before the barrage of missiles reconvened into the civilian and citizen population of Israel. Almost 100%, I think actually by now 100% of Israel has been attacked by rocket fire. As of yesterday, they still hadn't reached a lot in the Negev, but unfortunately, they did reach a lot yesterday. So as part of what we do in EMET, we're here to tell the EMET. EMET means truth in Hebrew. And we're here to help inform members of Congress, staffers, and the public at large, basically about the situation and what the people of Israel are currently up against. Ambassador Reuven Azar, he is the Deputy Chief of Mission in the Embassy of Israel.
Sarah, thank you very much for organizing this, and I'm sorry I went to the house side. I just came from the State Department, so I really apologize for being late. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for your support for the State of Israel at this difficult moment. You can rest assured that the government of Israel is going to do whatever it takes to defend the people of Israel. And fortunately, we're having the full support of people of the United States, the administration, and Congress. So we are really fortunate to have that support. Basically, we have a very specific aim in response to the rocket attack of Hamas and other terror organizations in the Gaza Strip. We want to restore security for our citizens, and we want to get into a ceasefire. We have pulled out from Gaza, as you know, in 2005. We are not in the business of going back to police the Gaza Strip. And we want the Palestinians to be able to govern themselves in a responsible way without them continue their attacking against us. Basically, what is happening until now? We have almost 1,300 rocket launches since this basically attack began, and more than 1,000 rockets that have hit Israel. And the gap derives from the fact that we have developed the Iron Dome system, which is really I'll talk about it later on. It's really a remarkable system. It's a technological breakthrough in the world level. As you all know, this system, the development of this system was done by Israeli scientists, but it has been supported financially by the administration and the Congress of the United States that saved numerous quantities of lives. So basically, Israel has been attacking the Gaza Strip with more than 1,750 targets, and what we are targeting is the infrastructure of Hamas. I'm talking about rocket launch sites, I'm talking about storage facilities, about production sites, about different kinds of tunnels, whether it be attack tunnels or detonating tunnels, which I'll explain later on what they mean. As you know, Hamas is doing these attacks from population centers, while Israel is basically developing systems in order to protect its civilians from Hamas rockets. Hamas is using the population to defend the rockets. We are here attacked by different kind of weaponry. Some of them are locally produced, manufactured. Some of them are smuggled, mainly from Iran. So we have about 6 million people in Israel. That would be like 200 million Americans being attacked. And you probably know how the American public would react if cities like New York, Washington, etc. were bombarded, and what kind of reply the people of America would demand from their government. Israel is really acting with restraint because we understand that Gaza was abducted. Actually, Hamas didn't only abduct our children, they abducted the population of the Gaza Strip, and they are using the population of the Gaza Strip as a human shield in order to continue with their attacks that are aimed basically at the destruction of the State of Israel. So until now we have, unfortunately we heard yesterday of the first Israeli that has been killed out of because of mortar bombs that were near the Gaza Strip. We have around 100 injured. On the Palestinian side there are about 207 killed and almost 1,500 injured. People are asking us, how come that Israel launches such an attack when you have such a difference in the number of victims? And the answer is simple. The answer is the answer that I gave the day before, is that Israel is doing its utmost to defend its population, and fortunately also the population is cooperating with the Front Home Command in running fast enough to shelters. Unfortunately, we have problems with the elderly. We just heard, for example, the day before yesterday, there was an 80-year-old kid that has been injured because he wanted to help his grandma, that he couldn't make the 15 seconds to the shelter, so he came out of the shelter to take her into the shelter, and in the process of doing that, he was hit by a shell. So people are asking us, well, where is the proportionality? What? The proportionality would be in a situation in which Israel sends an indiscriminate rocket into the Gaza Strip each time Hamas fires an indiscriminate rocket against Israel. But Israel, of course, is not doing that. Israel is having, as I'm going to explain right now, Israel is doing a pinpoint operation. Now, where are these rockets coming from? As I said, some of them are smuggled. One country that is producing and smuggling them is Iran. Sudan is a base in which some of these rockets are being stored and then smuggled into the Sinai, into the Gaza Strip. Sudan was also a location in which there were factories that were producing these missiles that are with Iranian design. You have some of the rockets that have been smuggled in an aerial way from Iran to Syria and to Lebanon, and from there in ships to Gaza. And sometimes those rockets come through the sea straight to the Sinai Peninsula. Another area of contraband is Libya. As you know, Libya has disintegrated, and there you have huge caches of weapons that are being sold by terrorist organizations both to the whole Sahel region to the south of North Africa, the southern part of Sahara, to Egypt and to the Gaza Strip via Sinai. And also there's some, as I said, coming from Lebanon. So a little bit explanation about what do we mean by these tunnels? What is so dangerous about these tunnels? In this map you see, this is the, oh, you hear me right now? This is the triangle of borders between the Gaza Strip, Israel, and Egypt. Okay? This, what you see here, is the old. Thank you. Thank you. What you see here is the old airport of Gaza, the Hania, and basically this is Kibbutz Kerem Shalom. In this place, you have the entrance of all the humanitarian assistance that is coming from Israel and from Egypt to the Gaza Strip. So what we have seen in the last 2 weeks, and that is very typical of Hamas, they are attacking this place because they want to inflict more damage on the population by preventing Israel from supplying the goods, to exacerbate the humanitarian problem, so the international community puts pressure on Israel to stop the operation. So basically what we are doing, we are keeping, despite the mortar attacks and the tunnel attacks, there was one attack tunnel that was detonated at the entrance of Kibbutz Kerem Shalom. Despite that, we are continuing the supply of humanitarian assistance. Now, Hamas has said that it's going to prepare all sorts of surprises, and was trying to inflict more damage by doing not only attacks with rockets and with tunnels, but also trying to attack the Israeli shore with this sort of marine commandos that came to attack the shore of Israel. Fortunately, they were intercepted by the IDF, and the attack was curtailed. So I won't show you the whole movie because I like to leave room for questions. You will see that it was basically intercepted. Okay, let's see how I stop this. But people are saying, okay, there are not many Israelis that are being hurt, they are being hit. Basically, this is an example of how the life of average Israelis are being curtailed because of the rocket attacks. Is it a siren going off now? And a rocket's flying from Gaza. Basically, right now the rocket was intercepted by Iron Dome. So basically, they are calling all the people they managed to go into shelters because in the 10 minutes after the attack, and as a result of the interception of Iron Dome, sometimes you have pieces of metal falling from the sky that can hurt the population, and maybe also you have a scenario in which the Iron Dome won't work and then the rocket will hit. So people have to go ahead and do this. This is another example of a siren going off in Ashdod.
That's from Gaza. Gaza.
These are the rockets that are flying from Gaza
in
northern Israel. So usually people that are in the range of 40 kilometers around Gaza, they have to go for shelter within 15 seconds. People that are more in the Jerusalem, Tel Aviv area, they have like 30 seconds, 45 seconds. So basically what is the IDF trying to do? First of all, try to create, as I said, targeted, pinpointed targets to be very defined what to do. Having active defense such as Iron Dome and discipline from the population in entering the shelters and be ready to the next step. Now, everybody's asking, okay, when Israel is going to invade Gaza? When are we going to do this land incursion? Well, we're not in the business of being too informative about that, okay? We have, sorry. But basically, as some of the information has gone out today, some of our troops are actually are doing operations right now as we speak. It's not necessarily a massive operation. Sometimes it's a commando operation, Maybe in the future it's going to be more of a land incursion that will be more massive, but it's up to the cabinet and to the IDF to decide. Now, what are we trying to do in order to prevent casualties? Basically, what we are trying to do, we have developed a method that I think is not matched in any army in the world. That because of the fact that Gaza is very densely populated, we want to minimize civilian casualties. So here is an example. We'll see if this works. There is something called a knock on the roof. It's a warning shot. Basically what we do is we send an empty shell to the rooftop of a building. Before doing that, we usually call by telephone, we send text messages, and we send pamphlets from the air. So actually we are telling those attacked in advance that we are going to attack them. Okay? There are not many armies that are doing that. We know that most of the operatives are now you can see here that in this case we did the knock on the roof, and there was an order from Hamas to send the people to the rooftops in order to prevent a shelling. So this is an example how they use the human shield in order to prevent attacks. Now here I'm going to give you, this is an example of aborting a strike. Basically, you know, the air of Gaza is monitored all the time, and when we have an attack, we send surveillance planes in order to watch the area, and we get to the conclusion that there are going to be casualties. Usually, the strike is avoided. So basically, this is a map that shows what is the proximity between the houses and those hits that are being targeted. So we are talking here about a strike that has to be so accurate that it wouldn't hit all the houses that are in the range of 10 meters from the target that we are dealing with. So if I have to explain a little bit more, what does it mean that the public is disciplined? Basically, what we are having here is a situation which we have drafted. My daughter, she just finished the army 3 or 4 months ago. She was in a combat unit of a search and rescue unit of the Home Front Command. So she was drafted now for this operation, and she's stationed in the city of Bet Shemesh. So beyond the fact that you have the municipalities that are being part of the system, try to and working in cooperation with the Home Front Command, you have soldiers in each city that are ready to jump into each building if it is hit by the rocket to rescue the people from the building. Now a little bit about the Iron Dome. What the Iron Dome does is it intercepts long-range rockets. Short-range rockets. This is a system that doesn't exist in any place in the world. Usually, in order to develop a system such as Iron Dome, there are different defense systems against rockets, like Arrow, like David Sling. Each category of rockets defends another range of rockets. The Arrow deals with the interballistic, intercontinental missiles. The David Sling with medium range, and Iron Dome deals with a short range. Usually it takes about 10 years to develop such a system. Israel has developed this system in 3.5 years. So in 2011 we were fortunate to get support of the administration and Congress in financing more batteries for Israel. We, in Operation Defense, Pillar of Defense, we had a pretty high success rate of that of those missiles and of this defensive missiles. And I can tell you that in this operation, the success rate has gone even higher. So what does it give us? Not only it protects our citizens, but also gives room for the decision makers in Israel to make cool-headed decisions and not to rush into doing things that can be counterproductive, because at the end of the day, there is less urgency when it comes to saving human lives. So I want to leave time for questions, so I'll rush a little bit. When it comes to humanitarian aspects, as I said, Kerem Shalom remains open. Every day we send about between 100, around 100 trucks of food and medicaments. In usual times when we don't have conflict, it usually goes up to 200 to 300. But basically we are giving all the supply that the Gazans demand at this point in time. Another element is the fuel that is going in for their power plant, so they have electricity. There are 2 electricity lines that were hit by rockets. We haven't fixed them yet, but you can still have, there's still a flow of electricity into the Gaza Strip. There are other humanitarian cases such as medical cases that are being treated in Israel, and people with dual citizenship that are going out. So we are going to continue the work until we finish it. We have patience. We are not in a rush. Our government understands that what Hamas is trying to do is to drag us into a situation that we massively killed civilians in order to bring the international community to pressure us to stop. We are at this point working very closely with our Egyptian neighbors. There was an initiative for a ceasefire that was rejected by Hamas. Our Prime Minister has decided yesterday, after a few hours in which Israel unilaterally stopped the fire, to expand the operation. So in the coming days, if a ceasefire is not achieved, you probably are going to see an expansion of the Israeli operation. And we feel that we have the full support of the government of the United States. Actually, they are engaged with us in the measure that we want. We do not want different players to try to get into the picture and serve the purpose of Hamas, like the Qataris and the Turks. And I think the United States is doing a good job in helping us in that regard. So it's a matter of patience and of perseverance, and I hope that those will be over as soon as possible, because at the end of the day, as I said, we want to restore the ceasefire. Thank you. Yes, please.
Two brief questions. One is that available online?
Everything is available online, yes.
Okay.
We will send you the links.
Okay, very good. And the other thing is, can you explain David Sling and when it will be operational?
Okay. So I'll give you a picture of the whole missile defense situation. We have started with Arrow 2 in 1996. We have a joint program with the United States on the Arrows, Arrow 2, David Sling, and Iron Dome. The total investment in those programs is $2.7 billion. The difference between the Arrow 2 and 3 and the David Sling and the Iron Dome is that the first 3 are joint projects with the United States. We are developing it together. Our scientists are sitting together. We are doing experiments together. I don't have the picture of when David Sling is going to be operational, but I know it's in an advanced stage. The same goes to Arrow 3, which is in a developing process. Arrow 2, I think, is operational. And when it comes to Iron Dome, as I said, we have developed it. There is a move now to start producing it in the United States. So we have asked, and fortunately there was an approval of additional funds in order to start production in the United States beginning of next year. This system is revolutionary, and actually we want to, I had a friend when I served in Egypt that each time that he went to a meeting, I was a commercial attaché there, and each time we went to a meeting, he used to thank the Egyptians for the Arab boycott. And he said, how come you want to thank me for the Arab boycott? And he said, look, thanks to the Arab boycott, we had to develop an industry in order to export our product to Europe and the United States. If we wouldn't have boycotted us, probably we would be still in a grand country selling foodstuff to Egypt. Okay? So Hamas actually is going to be responsible for the fact that, and this shows how, how they are not serving their population. They are going, because of their attacks. Do you want me to raise my voice? Yeah. Okay. Because of those attacks, we had to develop the system that I think is going to revolutionize the concept of defense of armies, because which army in the world will not like to have such a system to defend their headquarters, their most essential population centers, etc. So I think this cooperation, and thanks to the support of the United States, Israel is going to benefit a lot from these systems when we start exporting them. And we already have some clients that are interested, believe me. Yes, please.
About the slides that show the efficiency of Iron Dome. In one slide, it says like it's 85% effective, but in the earlier slide, it says, well, out of about 1,250 rockets, Iron Dome only shot down
very good question.
250, which is just 20%.
Very good question. Very good question. We use the Iron Dome only in cases in which the rocket is aimed at a population center. So if it's going to fall in an open field, we're not going to intercept it. We don't want to waste our ammunition on that. But each time that a rocket is destined to fall in an urban center, then we intercept it.
Is it $50,000?
Sorry?
How much is it per?
Yeah. Well, I asked that question, and that's classified information. Okay. Now, so therefore you have the difference in the statistic. Now, when it comes to the efficiency in those cases that we decide to push the button, okay, when the 18-year-old soldier, whether it be a woman soldier or a guy, decides to push the button, okay, in those places that we push the button, then we measure the efficiency. So it's much higher than 85%. 85% was in pillar of defense. Right now, 2014, it's much higher. Please. Yes, go ahead.
I had two questions. One had to do with Fatah, because I had heard that they had actually launched a few rockets as well, whether there's been any diplomatic pressure on them to stop it and get out of the fight. And the other has to do with the smuggling of weapons through Egypt that you pointed out in some of your slides. I know that the government of Egypt is very unfriendly towards Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, and I was just wondering if there is cooperation going on to avoid resupply of these weapons. Thank you.
There is cooperation. We are cooperating with Egyptians both in the political level, in the intelligence level, in the military level. The Egyptians have launched an unprecedented logistic effort, engineering effort, to curb the tunnel smuggling, and I'm talking about around 1,700 tunnels that are connecting the Gaza Strip with Egypt. Egypt has got to the conclusion that this is a major threat to their national security, because Hamas is a Muslim Brotherhood movement. The Muslim Brotherhood is the enemy of the current regime, the current government in Egypt. And therefore, they are very, very keen to stop that smuggling. That is the reason why this time Hamas is going to find it very hard to resupply when it comes to smuggling from Iran, although it wasn't totally, it's not totally prevented. The Sinai Peninsula is a vast territory, and you have people, jihadi elements that are over there in mountainous areas in the Sinai, which is very difficult to find. The Egyptians are doing an effort, but they still have a problem there. Now, when it comes to Fatah, there are several problems, several dimensions. First of all, in the political level, we were shocked by the fact that Abu Mazen, who speaks about peace and about an agreement, has decided to have a pact with this terrorist organization. And we were sure that this pact cannot be anything positive. When people said that, maybe it can be a good thing because they will influence Hamas to reform, it's completely hilarious, because Hamas has said repeatedly that it's not going to reform, and actually the pact was done, they were smart enough to be pragmatic enough to do compromises with Fatah when it comes to the formation of the government. But their real aim was to change the situation, not only in the Gaza Strip, but also in Judea and Samaria. What they did with this abduction is basically to try and change the atmosphere in Judea and Samaria to set the agenda for the Palestinian people, because what they want to do, they are in a total war with Fatah. They are doing this so-called reconciliation because there is public pressure, but at the end of the day, what they want to do is take over the Palestinian national movement, okay? And this is what we have to prevent from them, and therefore, after Abbas has done it, part of his role has become irrelevant, because actually Hamas now is is giving the tone in the Palestinian arena, and we are going to have to invest a lot of effort in curtailing Hamas in order to re-engage with those in the Palestinian arena that want to engage with us and that recognize us. Now, when it comes to shooting of the military wing of Fatah in the Gaza Strip, that is also a very challenging issue, because first of all, we want Abu Mazen to have the influence to call these people to stop their firing, and these guys have been actually acting without too much discipline from their own leadership, and they're doing basically whatever they want. So it's another challenge that we're going to have. That's why we're because we know and we understand that the real force in the Gaza Strip today is Hamas and not anybody else. We're holding Hamas responsible, not only to stop its own shooting, but to stop the shooting of the other organizations. Please.
It's almost always easier to have more offensive weapons than defensive weapons to counter them. In practical terms, how well can Israel replenish its Iron Dome supplies, and can that be maintained if Iran has Hezbollah join in?
Thank you. Well, we are, as you know, producing these platforms in a very speedy phase in rhythm. We have already deployed 9 of those systems in the centers of our cities. You have a case then if rockets are being launched in the thousands at the same time, there are maybe capabilities that we won't be able to completely maintain in terms of defending our population. But I think that this is changing rapidly. We are capable of producing the necessity that we need, and we will have more systems defending our cities. Please.
My name is Gabriel Bastomsky. I'm an intern for Congressman Sean Duffy. I was wondering, are there any prospects for a diplomatic solution with Hamas? Are they willing to negotiate at all? And if so, what would that look like?
The aim of Israel is very, very defined. We want a ceasefire. Okay? Now, Hamas has a problem with Egypt, as was described in the past. But what we are trying to concentrate now is signaling Hamas that the only way for them out of this situation, out of the attacks that we are attacking them, or counterattacks, is to cooperate with the Egyptians. Okay? So this is the effort now. And we are trying to convince and to push for more and more countries. You know, the Arab League has supported the Egyptian initiative. So basically now you have a situation in which Israel and the Arab League are supporting this ceasefire. Okay? And that's not a body that really is famous for loving Israel. Okay? Now, in addition to that, we have to have Europe, you have to have other countries around the world on the same page on this. As much as we show resolution, we will be able to make this operation shortly and restore calm as soon as possible. So you have to push both on the military side and the diplomatic side, and the channel has to be Egypt.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you a question about the diplomatic arena. If you could inform us what has been the response of certain governments around the world which are not as directly involved but which are influential. For example, a new government in India, Russian Federation, governments within the European Union that have been friendly, such as the Czech Republic or Poland or Japan, South Africa, which may not have a direct role but may be very influential, particularly in the third world or in the non-aligned movement?
Generally, I can tell you that in Asia people are less interested, and the governments usually tend to issue very general statements of, calling for mutual restraint, things like that. Governments that are more involved, like in Europe, there we have a struggle because we have failed until now to create statements that would put the onus on Hamas solely. And this is something that we are struggling, and we are getting the help. Just yesterday, I was in the State Department, and getting assurances that the U.S. government is going to help us in Europe in order to get statements that are not balanced. We don't want statements that are balanced, that call both sides, because we don't think that Hamas is a legitimate side. We think they are a terrorist organization, and actually they are designated as a terrorist organization not only by us, by you, by the Europeans, even by the Egyptians. So we need less balance. We need less balance and a more aggressive approach from the side of our European friends. Please.
No country supplies water, electricity, all kinds of utilities to your enemy when it's at war. Why Israel continues to supply Hamas, the Gaza Strip, with all these things?
Because we are Jewish.
Yeah, that's right.
Number one.
We're stupid.
Number two is because there are certain rules of engagement when it comes to conduct in times of war. And Israel believes that in order to continue to get the support we are getting, and we are getting unprecedented support today from the international community to continue our campaign, in order to maintain that support, we have to continue to conduct ourselves in ways that are humane. Please.
Thanks very much. On the issue of Europe, Israel has not always done the best job with public relations, and with the tremendous growing amount of anti-Semitism in Europe, what can Israel do to get these type of messages out? As we all know, they are all pro-Palestinian. It's the poor Palestinians. It's never 1,000 rockets have been flown into Israel. Israelis are running for their life every minute of every day. Got to work on getting that out. And that's always a problem. Thank you very much.
Yes, it is certainly a problem. We have to take into account that there is a significant difference between the United States and Europe. Okay, first of all, in the United States we have a public that is supportive of Israel. We have similarities. We have joint values. We have similar experiences, being immigration societies. And of course, there are constituencies here, like the Jewish citizens of the United, the Jewish Americans, like Christians, like other sects of the population that are engaged in showing support and making sure that our voice is being heard. It's not only us. In Europe, we are more isolated. First of all, because the character of the Jewish minorities in Europe is different. They are not ready to, and they are not that much in quantity, but also not ready to engage in the way that Jewish Americans are being engaged. There are vast Muslim minorities, and when you say everybody, the fact that you have a demonstration of 2,000 people in central London near the embassy doesn't mean that the British people is against Israel. Okay, it means that you have a Muslim minority that's pretty extreme, that actually is freaking out some of the Brits as well, and has created all kinds of backlashes in the political system. And when it comes to governments, usually we have the government more engaged because we have a dialogue with them, and we send intelligence to them, and we are engaged with them in all kinds of projects of, for example, putting pressure on Iran when it comes to sanctions. Governments like the Brits, like the French, like the German, and so it's a much of a challenge there, and it's a struggle, but it's not lost. We are working with these governments, and we are going to continue to invest resources in order to make them as close as possible. Please.
I read in the Washington Post today that one of the goals
of Israel would not take down the leadership of Hamas. Is that true? And if it's true, why? It isn't post that. Your goal is not anything.
Our goal is to reach a ceasefire. And the question is, what are the means that we are going to use in order to achieve that goal? If in order to have the ceasefire, we're going to have to invade Gaza and go to the shelters in which these cowardly people that are exposing their population by themselves in shelters, we're going to take them out of there, okay? This entails a certain degree of effort and certain degree of loss of life. Maybe we're not interested to do because what we want to achieve is a ceasefire. So we have to be concentrated not in vengeance, but in serving the interest of the people as the elected government of Israel has decided to realize. Please.
Yeah, there are several areas. One of them is the issue of a ceasefire. I think it's admirable. I think it's probably the right thing to do if you're dealing with rational people, but you're not. I think there have been, 3 previous ceasefires with Hamas, and in true Islamic ideology going back to the 7th century, where Muhammad had a ceasefire with neighboring tribes until he could get strong enough to destroy them, then go in after them. And don't we see the same thing with Hamas? Have they re-armed, and each time more and more dangerous? And the world fundamentally sitting watching this happen. And yes, it'd be nice to have a ceasefire, but it's a rational thing to do. The other thing is, given what's happening with the human shield tactic that they use, reports are that they have facilities in hospitals, in mosques, in schools, besides in private homes. How can Israel root this out to assure that should there be, and I'd be dead set against it, should there be a ceasefire, these won't still be there to enable them to rearm, because some of their, as I understand it, manufacturing plants are located in these facilities. So what good is it? And then how does Israel get out to the world? The United States is not doing it. Canada is doing it. Merkel is doing it in Germany. The fact that the human shield tactic is working to their advantage because there is insufficient broadcast, if you will, throughout the world of how well they are using this tactic. And that's why you get into these scorecards that you had up there. 1 Israeli was killed and 200, whatever the number was, Palestinians were killed.
Well,
how do you handle this?
I'll start with the good news. The good news is that actually we have managed to convince many media outlets, and actually when you watch whether it be CNN or Fox News or CBS or MSNBC, all of them are using the terminology that we have basically pushed for as Hamas using civilians as human shields. Everybody understands it now. If it was even the day before yesterday in the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, okay? So everybody understands that very well. So this footage that I've showed you are all over the world, and people see it and people understand it. Now, how to reverse the equation and create a situation in which Hamas stops doing that's a very big challenge. But if you take good notice, you can see that today, 9 days after the operation has started, there is no pressure whatsoever on Israel to stop this operation. So it means that we have done something, we have achieved something with the international community. Now, with your first question, which is much more challenging, we live in a Middle East that is in turmoil. Okay, the most difficult threat on Israel is the pursuit of Iran of nuclear weapon capabilities. This is the number one threat. In addition to that threat, we have Hezbollah with tens of thousands of rockets. We have Hamas, have the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. We have other, Al-Qaeda involved elements, Salafists, ISIS. So when people tell us, "Oh, aren't you worried of ISIS? They are changing the face of the Middle East. There's a bunch of 10,000 terrorists." So we say, okay, we are fighting terrorists for the last 100 years. So there are another, bunch of terrorists. The question is, what means do they have in order to attack us? To what extent their threat is imminent to the state of Israel? They come maybe 4th or 5th or 6th in our list. Now the question is, going back to your question, the question is, whether the state of Israel has to be in a situation that is constantly attacking these adversaries, and whether we militarily have to deal with all these threats at once. I think that that would be very unwise, because the state of Israel has many advantages, but one of them is that we thrive in times of ceasefire, times of peace. Okay? In the last 7 years, in which the world faced one of the most difficult economic crises, Israel has been able to almost double its GDP, from a level of about $20,000 to a level that is reaching 40,000. And we did it in time of world recession. Okay? We are doing it because we are giving a chance to our communities, to our entrepreneurs, to work. We give them the quiet that they need in order to continue to become stronger, in order to have the resources to make the IDF stronger, and in order to survive. And we trust the government of Israel to be wise enough in using the resources that we have in a balanced way in order to prevent a situation in which we are in a complete total war all the time. So if the government of Israel decides that not only me, that I had to patrol the streets of Gaza for many years, okay, that my son will have to do it, so my son will do it. But right now we got to the conclusion that we don't have the interest of occupying the Gaza Strip in a permanent way. So it's up to the government to decide. The Prime Minister, and believe me, one of the great privileges of being here in the United States is having the chance to work with Ron Dermer, our ambassador, a very bright person, and one of the closest advisors to the Prime Minister. So I'm a little bit exposed. I have a window of how a Prime Minister thinks. And believe me, it's very difficult when you read newspapers, even when you read intelligence reports, or even if you had a security or a diplomatic organization, to understand what is the set of considerations that a Prime Minister has to have and why he makes decisions. So that's why we have a government that is elected. That's why we have an army that listens to that government. And I trust that government to do the job. Thank you. Please.
Hi, Alexandria Pelosi with Concerned Women for America. Can you tell us what American citizens can do to help Israel right now? I feel like we're all concerned for the safety of Israel, and we just want to do what we can to help.
Well, thank you. First of all, you are doing a lot. Thank you. First of all, you are doing a lot because the proof is in the pudding, you know. Congress is completely backing Israel. Administration is backing Israel. The American public is backing Israel. I think that there are many things that you can do in addition to that. First of all, be active in the internet, in all the media outlets. Second of all, when it comes to relations with Israel, try to encourage Israeli population. If you have a chance to buy Israeli products, do that.